Thank you so much, Eric, for that great presentation. Up next, please welcome SimpleFi's Senior Solution Director, Beth McBreen, and VP of IT at Furst-McNess, Joel Fleming. They will be presenting on planning and reporting on SAP S/4HANA at Furst-McNess and share their, share their stories. So now I'll hand it over to Beth and Joel. Thanks again, Eric.
Make sure I'm on off mute here. Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it. Thought I'd share my webcam for a minute and say hi to everyone out there. Thanks so much for joining. We are going to talk for the next half hour, 45 minutes, regarding the project that we completed at Furst-McNess Company at the end of last year, and kind of go into overall introduction. Joel's going to take us through an introduction, also talk about the business case, kind of overview, goals, things of that nature. I will focus on some of the project highlights, what were items of scope, within scope, and timeline, kind of overall project management items, and we'll have Joel also talk through, some of the pain points of the project, as well as some of the major wins, right? And what they're doing today with the solution as well. So we'll also share some screenshots and just kind of talk about overall process and again, how they're using SAC today. So, sorry, trying to move my webinar there. All right, so Joel, I will hand it off to you. If you want to give us a little introduction around Furst-McNess and yourself, would be great.
Sounds great. Thanks, Beth. Again, my name is Joel Fleming. I'm working at Furst-McNess as the Vice President of Information Systems. Furst-McNess is an independently owned agricultural company. We provide customized vitamin and mineral premixes, commodity blends, and feed ingredients to the beef, dairy, poultry, and swine industries throughout the U.S. and Canada. We provide customized solutions as alternatives to ag clients, which lead to enhanced livestock performance and profitability. In addition to that, we also offer innovative solutions to our suppliers for feed residues, residuals from the food, beverage, and biofuel industries. Furst-McNess has been around a little over 100 years, and if you have any questions on our business, you can go to mcness.com and we will give you more information on that. I want to go to the next slide. I want to give you a little bit of background on our project. So we've been an SAP customer for over 20 years. We recently went to S/4HANA through a greenfield implementation in 2018. That was just because of how many customizations and maintenance challenges we had with not following enough upgrades in our ECC platform. We've used Microsoft Excel as a key area for our budget templates. We've done a lot of financial reporting through our analyzer tool. And then our black book is our cycle or month end type of book that we publish to our board. That was done manually through the above tools and SAP directly. Also a little bit more on our ERP area, we do use these SD areas, so sales, delivery, financials, purchasing, manufacturing, process orders, just to help you give a little bit of scope of what we do within SAP. So SAP is definitely our foundation and our core to the what we do to run our business here. Our project goal was to find a tool to extend off of that core. We did not want to go too far with all of these other side tool applications that are available out in the industry. We were focused in on budgeting and financial reporting that would help us to eliminate the manual processes and steps that we were doing up above with our Black Book financials. Okay. We are a shop that tends to look at SAP products first, and then if there is no fit for that area, then we will go and expand beyond there. We spent a lot of time comparing a couple of different tools that were discussed earlier in the session here today. We reviewed BPC, and not just, there's multiple versions of BPC, so we were having to go through the comparisons of those different versions, Analytics Cloud, and then also whether or not we should try to resurrect anything from a legacy perspective for our budgeting process. The scope of that project was focused in on budget planning and Black Book publishing. So those were our two core drivers for our project and for the scope of what we were looking at for products. We wanted to make sure that it was a single planning platform for both the US and Canada areas, and that it could provide us a foundation for future financial reporting. So although we started out with a what I'll call a smaller scope, we wanted to make sure that we could extend beyond that. And part of the drive there was also to get tools that our finance team and others could leverage without developer intervention. We did not want to have to go in and have, for example, OBOPers or other people having to go in to generate reports for us in these areas. And then we also wanted to be able to expand into dashboard capabilities.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about just overall project highlights and kind of peeling back the onion a little bit from what Joel just talked about from overall project scope and goals, really. We looked at, again, the project had a financial reporting aspect to it, also had a planning component to it. We had our technical team as well to kind of support all of this. And so what did it take, you know, from kind of dialing it back and understanding the actual objects that were built within SAC, you know, in order to replace that monthly financial book. We had probably 10 to 15, so those of you that are familiar with Analytics Cloud today are using it today. We built one story with about 10 to 15 tabs within it, and those tabs included comparatives, right? We're comparing actual budget prior year. We're looking at cycle, or what McNess calls their cycles, would be, you know, months or periods to other companies. So more in a trended report fashion, we had trended reports, we had comparisons and reporting that was focused on product around what they call their ag summaries, would have more margin-based information. So quite a few different versions and views that is encompassed into their monthly financial book. They also have metrics that measures the monthly or the current cycles actual versus their targets. So a lot kind of goes into that overall Black Book, as Furst-McNess calls that. In addition to that, we had data actions. Again, for those of you that are familiar with what data actions are, or for those that aren't, it's basically a way to create advanced formulas, you know, script formatting, formulas that allow us to kind of have a push button, a play button that will run and generate calculations for us within the story or within another story. In this case, we actually had a separate process. I'll show you, we have got some screenshots here towards the end that will kind of illustrate the financial process and the data actions that were included. But certainly there were a handful of data actions that were created as a result to be able to facilitate that monthly book as well. There were also some input templates. So there was some manual input, things that we were not getting from source systems today, shares input being, or shares being an example there. So we also had to provide a couple, you know, pretty standard simple templates for them to be able to capture some manual data that they also wanted to reflect within their financial book. We did set up automated cash flow. So the use of combination of data actions, properties within the account dimension allowed us to do that, as well as manual adjustment templates to make any non-cash or other type of adjustments, ease of use adjustments, I would say, on the cash flow. But that also is a part of the Black Book as well. And then finally, you know, with the financial reporting, just kind of utilized and slightly configured that PDF publication out of Analytics Cloud so that they could send their Black Book to external sources. Okay, so that's really the scope of what the financial reporting looked at. We also had the planning side. So the planning really consisted of cost center. So cost center planning required a number, 2, 3 templates that we created, different slices, different ways to be, to kind of have that flexible planning. So do we want to see a cost center by account? Yes, probably from the cost center manager standpoint, that's how they want to view that. Somebody that was more within more of the consolidated corporate area, they may want to see one account and have all the cost centers listed, or maybe a division owner that has to see a group of cost centers. So we provided different views to make it very flexible. We also have data actions that were built in order to seed the budget with prior year actuals as a starting point. Those of you that are familiar with Analytics Cloud know that you have the capability then to carry similar seasonality if you populate or seed your budget with prior year actuals or forecasts. So you have that nice capability to do that and then plan as the annual, annual, quarter, monthly, however, at whatever point you want to. Sales and margin planning was kind of same idea. We had planning at a top down, so they would plan at a plant level, and then we would actually have created an allocation that would allow them to decide what the allocation percentage was. So they, McNess actually wanted to determine, okay, 30% goes to this profit center, 20% goes to this profit center. So we gave them that flexibility to do it across all cycles, or they could actually modify that between cycles as well for their plan. So the allocation logic was a component we created 2 different ways, being able to do top down, as I mentioned, as well as bottoms up. And if we have time, we have some screenshots at the end that'll give you kind of an idea of the top down is more driver-based driver approach, and the bottoms up just gave them the capability then to make last minute tweaks as they were finalizing their budget. Data actions, again, there for prior actuals. Inverse functionality, I'll probably talk about this more towards the end, but this is really nice functionality that allows actuals. So use gross margin as an example, where your actual data, this is a calculated metric, right? And so it's a calculated number, but when you're using planning, sometimes you want to plan and say, okay, I want to plan my revenue and then I want to plan my margin, and we're going to, and cost will, be the plug essentially. And, but in many times you can't do that in systems because a calculated account can also be an input, but in SAC it can. So we really leveraged that functionality here on the sales and margin side so that they could, they could actually use what's a calculation in actuals. They could actually enter that, those drivers in as within their budget version. Finally, we had a separate model for sales and margins. So we did have data actions that would transfer data over to their main finance. We did have, as part of the project, live reporting. So it wasn't actually, I think, initially in scope. It was one of those that once we started talking and educating McNess a little bit more around acquired models versus live models, they said, wow, it'd be great if we could at least get the connections going. They did not have a standalone BW. This was, during the evaluation period, something they didn't want. So, but again, because they leveraged existing embedded BW queries with the analyzer, we were able to access those, as well as set up live connections for some of the standard CDS views that are out there for, DSO, DPO. So what we were able to do during the project, during our time at the project at least, was to create those connections and educate McNess on how live connections work, so that they could, post-implementation, they could run with it. They could do additional things with it, whether it was dashboards or daily reporting. So, being able to kind of set the framework and the groundwork for them is really what we did as part of the project. And then finally, from a technical standpoint, the Cloud Connector was actually already installed, but we established connections to their S4 development and production environments. They did decide to go with a single tenant, so we didn't have a separate SAC development tenant. We had, again, separate connections where we had separate connections that went from, again, dev and prod. We did have our technical team create some custom CDS views for us, mainly related to master data, so cost center, GL account, so on and so forth. We did also have a custom view that was based off of the GL account balance view in S4. And again, those were just to meet requirements on what we needed for either hierarchies or additional information coming out of S4. And then, as I mentioned before, we used leveraged embedded BW queries that were already there, and they were already leveraging through Analyzer for their sales and margin detailed data we were able to access as well. So real quick, as far as the team composition and structure, it really was on the McNess side, you had a project lead. That person probably spent 50% of their time with us. And that was really just, hands-on knowledge transfer and then validation, right? Data validation, making sure that we've got the appropriate roll-ups and for reporting. And so that was really their role, being kind of hands-on throughout. We had great executive leadership and sponsorship with Joel. Number one, of course, supporting the project, making sure that we escalated any key decision points to the CFO or CEO. We were able to have 1 or 2 sessions actually with the executive team showcasing what has been done currently. So again, fabulous support in that area. We probably only used about 10% of their time. Maybe Joel's a little bit more as he was involved with status and all of that. But then we also, of course, had some subject matter experts that were brought in as we did some testing around templates and everything else. So on our side, on a SimpleFi team, we did have some offshore resources that helped us with mainly the customization of those CDS views. Myself kind of playing the solution architect, project management, I was 20 to 30% on the project, and then we had kind of our core developer that was 100% on the project doing all the development within SAC. So from a timeline perspective, really, we actually started October 1st was the first day that we were on site with McNess. Of course, we had some work done in September ahead of time. We wanted their copies of their reports, their black book, org structures, things of that nature that we, probably were doing some prep work in September, but really hit the ground running October 1st, and we were done, by middle of December. So, we had the integration kind of out of the gate. Development was, a little bit throughout because we were still, like I mentioned, towards the end deciding, hey, we've got some time. Let's set up those live connections for McNess, or, we would find some additional things. So, I don't know, Joel, if you want to comment maybe on a couple of the timeline highlights and go through a couple more.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, great teamwork, especially up front there of getting things started. I was quite impressed with how fast we could get our S4 system connected up and into the cloud for the SAC tool. That's one of the, in my opinion, big benefits in that space. Many of us, I'm sure on the call, have grown up working through on-premise solutions and know that takes a lot of time and effort to get the connections, the hardware, et cetera, in place. And as I mentioned early on, one of the big conversation points that we had between BPC and SAC was around the amount of time that it takes on the BPC side to go through and do all those upfront administration tasks. And so we knew with the SAC tool, it was what I'll call the newer product compared to BPC, but we really put some bets on making sure that we could get this up and going quickly and this timeline here should show should speak for itself, I should say. From I guess the next part of it, we want to kind of share a few of the pain points, and these pain points, I want to start right up front and say, you know, we've been working with SAP since our go live on these pain points and building these into the product. We've already started to see some of these types of items coming through in their updates that they're doing on a regular basis in the cloud. And most of these pain points, I feel like they're going to be in the product and resolved over the next year. So I just want to start off with that I've been very happy with this partnership with SAP and SimpleFi to get these out there and discussed and recognized and going forward. So as Beth mentioned early on, one of the limitations we ran into is Furst-McNess operates on a 13 cycle year. So every 4 weeks we go through a cycle close or period close type activity. And SAC does not out of the box support that in some of its nice drill-in features, such as in the period over period and other types of things that are available in the tool. So we did have to go through there and do a more generic cycle dimension. And with that cycle dimension, we're able to go through and use our activities. But that has provided some challenges on more overhead in maintenance of activities. So you heard Beth talking a little bit about data actions and some of those types of things that we are doing because of that 13 cycle activity versus them being generally available out of the box, because we, you know, if you were a 12 period cycle, then some of those types of data actions would go away. As far as limitations on the financial reporting for formatting, again, there's some nuances within the areas of the how the formats look, and so we had to go in and accommodate certain formattings and talk those through with our executive team. So it's one of those things where it's a somewhat of a blessing in disguise. Our executive team did not want to go through and create a lot of changes or introduce complications into the tool. So I will give them credit. They were very accommodating in, hey, looks like we have some limitations on this type of format. Will that be okay? And they kept coming back with great sponsorship and saying, yes, that's fine. We can adapt to that formatting. Go on to the next one, please. Another challenging area is in the publication process. So as Beth mentioned early on, we have a handful of board members that would not have access, and theoretically you don't want your board members having to go into a tool electronically anyhow, at least in our type of business. So the generation of our black book is done in 2 formats. We will export it off into a PDF format and produce those reports. The exporting to PDF has some challenges, and you'll see as we get down into our screenshots, you know, when we're going through the story for the black book, we're talking about 15, 20 pages out there. And so as you go across each of those pages, there is some formatting that we have to go through and manually adjust through Adobe because they do not just click out there. And most of those have to do with how a page will zoom in or zoom out inconsistently as we go across there. Another area of challenge for us was on the data imports. The queries for those exports, if you want to say, hey, I need to add this field into my query, those queries are very inflexible at this point. So you have to go through there and almost build them up again from scratch rather than just being able to make adjustments to those queries and import process. So we've spent a lot of time with SAP on that. They definitely recognize that because they run into that with their own demos and things like that. So that is definitely high on their list to get resolved. And then the other area is just if you do have any imports into SAC that fail, some of the data coming through there can be kind of generic. We don't have a lot of failures, but as you come through those, you have to just sort through, was it because of a missing customer? Was it because of a missing, whatever? The messages come out generic, so you have to do a little bit of extra debugging to find out what that exact issue was and get the data corrected. So those were the major pain points. As I said, we spent a lot of time with SAP on those, and so I'm hoping to have those resolved as the product goes forward. From a major wins perspective, we are very happy with the speed of deployment. So within that speed, we also had a set budget, and we kept to that budget. So thank you, SimpleFi, for helping to guide us through there. I can't say enough about them being able to walk us through there as an implementation partner. So this product obviously is brand new to us, and so we counted on them to come through and provide us the right steps as we went through there. We also had great sponsorship from our CFO, Matt Hartman, and our CEO, President Matt Heinrich. They were fantastic in keeping us to minimal scope creep. It's not that the questions weren't getting asked and saying, hey, can we do this? Can we do that? But we went through those debates, and then we were able to control that scope creep and lay the foundation so that as we completed the project, we could move on and do a lot of this stuff ourselves. And we'll talk a little bit about that down at the bottom of the presentation. The Black Book reporting, again, we went from basically a 40+ page financial reporting package down to 15 pages. So a lot of that is because our internal executive teams can go into the tool itself and do drill-in operations and other reports that allow them the flexibility to look at data in different formats. Again, a lot of those extra pages had to deal with presentations of information in different, the same data, just in different formats. So that was a big part of the reduction, was the ability not only to generate the PDF for our board members, but then allow our executive team to have additional information or reports right there at their hands. We also created daily metrics as well. So we have, this was a big part of things that we wanted to get into, was being able to provide daily reports or daily information to our leadership team in a consistent format. So again, we went through that, especially on areas such as key metrics that are focused on, such as we are a big operator in tons, and then obviously trying to track those margins per ton. We're all tied into those metrics that we went through. Okay, last parts of it here were the real-time also provide us year-over-year visibility. Again, remember, we were a greenfield implementation, so our data goes back to 2018. We did not bring across a lot of data prior to that. So we have our charts and our information out there limited back to when we started that, which was 2018. So you can see about 2 years of data out there flowing through the system. And then you can also, in those reports, see the trend lines, et cetera. So Beth mentioned about seasonality. We can track, you know, cycle over cycle, as well as the seasonality year over year as we go through our reports and stories. And then, as we mentioned there, this was really the foundation then. So it put us in a position so that we could come through here and generate our own reports after SimpleFi left. And we've created a good 15, 20 reports and dashboard stories out there after they've left, without any developer help, of course. All right. And then just a quick note from our quote from our President and CEO, Matt Heinrich. Again, the whole leadership team has been very pleased with the results of this, and again, fantastic work done by SimpleFi and our finance team. One of the other notes that I was going to make that I think is a big win is that our controller, Kelly Prevey, can go through this process of publishing that black book on her own with very minimal help from IS or others out there.
All right. So we're going to just wrap up with a couple SAC screenshots. Some of the screenshots of the McNess models and kind of their solution, just a couple other points to talk about. So you can kind of see here, just as we look at around administration, right? So I mentioned kind of the box in the top right here. That really is, from an administrator perspective, these are some of the tasks that in order to produce that financial black book, that these are monthly activities that are taking place. So we have things like your balance sheet calculations. You have those manual inputs we talked about. Joel mentioned the 13 cycles. And so the customizations that we had to do in order to incorporate those also requires us to have year-to-date cycle data actions, some of the cycle over cycle. So one of the actual recent developments that has been released. So before, these were all going in, and you can see the screenshot just below the SAC admin task has that data action with the little play button there. And they would go in, they would run it, and then we would have a validation report so they could see and check and make sure that everything looks correct without having to always go back to the black book or other. Now, I could see one of the enhancements that they may do next may be to actually schedule these, right? So one of the more recent releases is now we can schedule data actions. So they may load things at the end of the month, and they may say, okay, at the end of the month on this day, we want to go ahead and run this every hour or every day for 7 days or however long it takes them to complete their close. So that may be a step up, and obviously they're recognizing additional enhancements and kind of adapting that to their models today. The screenshot just to the left here, I sort of just highlighted finance and gross margin because those also with the folders, the backups and live were part of it as well. But really, finance and gross margin were the models that we created as part of the implementation. So not just stories, as Joel mentioned, but they're able to, again, create additional models. They've got a finance secured, which is actually more geared towards lower level detail by cost center and having the appropriate security while still being able to allow them consolidated view results in the finance model. Having much more detail within gross margin, having a full detail or other that has significantly more dimensions that are more for analytics and reporting opposed to maybe the planning. So again, just by, with really no help from SimpleFi, they're able to go in and not just do the stories, but also handle the and build some of the additional models that they've needed. Here's an example I talked about earlier about that inverse functionality. So the planning process around gross margin, we talked about basically we seeded the budget with their prior year actuals. So we had prior year tons in there. We also would seed it with prior year financial information as well. And really, from a top-down perspective, what I mean by that is also by plans, is they would go ahead and look at by plans, they would budget their tons and then their sales per ton, their cost per ton, their freight per ton, so on and so forth, and that would go ahead and drive their financials. So they had the capability to enter that in and calculate. They also could do basically backwards. They could go in and then update financial, a sales number or a COGS number, and that would actually then update their sales per ton numbers. So again, they could, it can go, as it states, inverse, go both ways. As far as, again, sales per ton is an actual calculation, their actuals, and then they're entering in that data and budget. So again, this is kind of just a snapshot of their gross margin template. On the cost center planning side, so that was really, I guess what I didn't mention on the sales margin piece was after that template was created, that's when they would go forward and from the top-down perspective, apply the allocation percentages to profit centers and be able to push the button, basically the data action that would run their allocation down to the profit center. On the cost center side, these were, here's an example of a template that we set up here. where their cost center managers could come in and they could select a cost center grouping. They could select a single cost center. Their cost centers roll up to profit center. So again, they could select at different levels and then plan by expense. We also did automatically seed the budget with prior actuals. That also helps from kind of from a template maintenance perspective, right? So that we can have data populated in your budget, and then we can go ahead and have that suppressed. So instead of having, you know, thousands of accounts, we're only seeing those that were there for a prior year, and then you can go ahead and insert or add additional accounts if there's new expenses from year over year. So that was one of the things that we did as well. But we have different views. You know, we have a view here that's cost center accounts. We had account by cost center. Again, just to keep it very flexible, we had some that were used for new cost centers that had no prior year expenses. So try to make it as flexible as possible in development. And then on the financial reporting side, I'll just mention here, this is one screenshot of their Black Book. And you can see the tabs going across the top, and this report is specifically comparing actual budget and prior year, both in monthly or cycle and the cycle year to date view. And one of the things also at McNess and during the project was kind of the overall importance of version management and how that was handled. And so within the finance model, they do have, you know, standard actual and budget. We also have prior year as a version that is an annual. They have a couple annual steps that they do to roll their balance sheet, and this is included where they have to run an action that will basically load their prior year, their current year into their prior year version. And that really is just, it's kind of from an ease of reporting standpoint, being able to just select all three versions. One of the other challenges that they noticed is McNess wanted to pull in daily results for things like sales. Those sales, though, were being reported on the Black Book, whereas the Black Book really is a month-end reporting package. And so what we actually did was we created a separate version called Actual Reported. And then we tied the Black Book to Actual Reported. And so what that allowed us to do is basically they can still see actual data coming in daily and be able to have those daily metrics and everything else. But in addition to that, at the end of month end, when everything's closed, they're able to basically run a data action that posts everything into an actual reported or kind of a final category or version. So we did that to kind of help accommodate that. Joel, I don't know if there's anything else you want to mention on this slide, or if you want me to move on to the next slide.
Go ahead, go to the next slide. And this area here, you know, you can start to understand that actual reported. Prior to putting that actual reported version in there, if we were in cycle 7 right now, the first week of it, we are still closing out cycle 6, we would have started seeing numbers in that cycle 7 column. So this is a good example of where that extra version came in. We didn't even really think much about that as we were starting off. And so again, SimpleFi was very quick to help us react to getting that secondary version out there so that we could hide cycle 7 information from showing up in these cycle over cycle reports. As Beth mentioned, this has got our full Black Book, and as you go across here, you can now start to understand that each of these pages kind of has its own look and feel to it, as you would have seen just from these last, from this page and the prior page. So as I mentioned, when we go to export this out to PDF, you can export out the full story, but as you go through there, that's what I meant by this may come through as a 50% zoomed page, whereas the prior one may have come through as a 100% zoomed page. So once we exported it out to Adobe, we had to go through some of those adjustments. But within here, you can see that those little carrots over on the left-hand side basically show you that you can drill into the sales or the costs underneath of each of these areas by cycle. So it does allow our leadership team that is online within the tool to drill down and look at the additional accounts or information underneath of each of those areas. Okay, let's go ahead to the next page. This page we put in here just so that we could start to show some of the things that we've done since the project is completed out. We do have a number of dashboard type items that folks will pull up on their computers first part of the day. We also have those already available through the SAC iPhone app. You can see that on the far left side that you could start to pull these up within your phone app as well. Again, the majority of our executive team tends to look at things more in front of their computer, but if they're traveling, they will pull these up on their phones for that view of things. And then also on the right-hand side, this is just another report we were able to build out after the fact. This was focused in on being able to show by our operating areas and profit centers and product lines different measurements. So if we want to look at things on the cycle over cycle, we just thought it'd be good to show you some of these graphs. This one here happens to be for the tons, but you can go through here by gross margin per ton. It allows you to change what you want to display in that grouping on the right-hand side by just selecting each one of those areas. In addition to this, we didn't talk about it, but as part of the budget process, we also then came through afterwards and created the cost center reporting. So our cost center reporting has been rolled out based off of actuals versus budget. And that's where that additional model was that we created so that it was a secure view of that. And so within there, you have the cost center and cost center managers within that dimension. And so that's how we went through the security model for that, so that nobody going through their cost centers can see other people's cost centers that they don't belong to. And then also we did other types of reports like this for plant shipments, tons, manufacturing costs. So again, we've been able to take that foundation and really run with it and expand on more reports that our leadership team has been looking for.
All right. Well, Joel, thank you so much for participating and helping kind of share the story of the implementation. If anybody has specific questions around the project, around what we've implemented, or again, any other questions, you can certainly reach out to me or anybody really on the SimpleFi team. So with that, Lauren, I'll turn it back over to you.
Joel and Beth, thank you so much for that awesome presentation. Right now, we're going to take a 5-minute break. So please, again, let us know if you have any issues with access that we can address before we get started with the workshop. And also, we have 3 more poll questions that we'd like to ask you guys and get your participation with, if you don't mind. So we'll take a quick break and we'll get started in about 5 minutes. Thanks.